Thank you, everybody. We have another speaker who has just arrived, and we're really happy to have her, Kristy Pickurel. Kristy has served in a nonprofit management role for more than 10 years. She's currently the Director of Development and Communications for the Environmental Research and Education Foundation. An honors graduate of Elon University, Kristy has held positions with several organizations across the Triangle. Kristy is a member of the Environmental Industry Association, Women's Council, and Association of Fundraising Professionals. She's also a team captain with the National Multiple Sclerosis Society and room parent with Swift Creek Elementary School. We welcome her to the stage.
Good morning, everybody. Today I'm going to start my presentation by talking about grocery shopping. I want to know from you guys how many of you, when you go to the grocery store, take your reusable bags with you. Okay, thank you. Now, for those of you who didn't raise your hand, this famous question, paper or plastic? How many of you choose paper? Okay, and how many choose plastic? All right, thank you for your answers. I'm going to ask you this question again later in my presentation. We're going to see if your answers have changed. And I want you to think about why you chose paper or plastic. And do you know what happens to that paper or plastic bag once you've used it and disposed of it? Today we're going to look at life cycle analysis, which is a cradle-to-grave approach to looking at the environmental impacts of a product or process. Life cycle analysis can help us answer this question. Should we recycle our waste if the act of recycling actually impacts the environment more than putting the waste in a landfill? For instance, we're going to take a look at the life of a piece of paper. Paper starts out as a tree. The tree's taken to a manufacturing facility where it's processed into paper. The consumer uses that paper, and once the consumer is finished with that piece of paper, they do one of two things. They either throw it in the garbage can, where it's taken to a landfill. Perhaps that landfill then converts the paper into energy, or the consumer puts the paper in a recycling bin, where it's recycled into another material, which is then recycled again and creates another piece of material, and that cycle continues until the fibers in that piece of paper are too weak to be created into yet another piece of material. On average, paper can be recycled about 5 to 8 times before it becomes unusable. Several years ago, there was a study that was done that looked at the life cycle analysis of 4 different materials: paper, plastic, metal, and glass. The researchers looked at the life cycle analysis of each of these 4 products. And what they did was they looked at the cost of the energy and emissions produced and, for recycling the existing materials versus creating brand new materials for each of those products. Now, one thing the researchers recognized that I want to address is the almost universal aversion to landfills. What you'll see here is kind of what people think of, a lot of the general public thinks of when they think of a landfill. They think of what I call the old school city dump, where it's smelly, there's a lot of pests, it poses health risks to the neighboring environment. However, this is more what a modern day landfill looks like. There's minimum odor nuisance, there's very limited pests, and there's a lot of rules and processes in place to keep the waste from contaminating the earth. So that's something that the researchers recognized and that I definitely wanted to point out to you guys today. In their project, the researchers worked under the premise that recycling is a good policy only if the emissions and resources to collect, sort, and recycling the product were less than the emissions and resources used to create the virgin material. And by virgin material, I mean what that product is sourced from. So in the instance of paper, it would be trees. So if the emissions and resources to create the virgin material, in addition to the resources to dispose of that material safely, were greater than the recycling. So recycling was better if those emissions were less than it was to create the material from the virgin material. So what you'll see here is each of the 4 materials that were studied, the parent material of each of those materials, the availability of the virgin material, and then what the EPA estimated the recycling and recovery rate for those products to be in the year 2010. The study found that with glass, there's actually no benefit to recycling glass. In fact, there can actually be an added cost when you recycle glass. The reason for this is that the facilities that can handle the recycling of glass are very few and far between. So if you don't live near one of those facilities, there can actually be a very high transportation cost plus transportation emissions to get the glass from the consumer to the facility that can recycle it. If glass ends up in the landfill or is on the ground, there's no toxic, it's not toxic, there's no emissions produced from it. And if you look at the virgin material of glass is sand. We have obviously have an abundance of sand, so there really is no scarcity in creating glass from its virgin material. Whoops, sorry about that. The study found that with plastic is petroleum derived, and therefore it comes from a very scarce material. So there is a benefit to recycling plastic. Plastic actually has one of the lowest recycling rates, but you would think it would be higher because the material used to make it is scarce, and plastic is in very high demand. So that was something that was quite interesting that they found. Metal can include both aluminum as well as e-waste, which is electronic waste, and that would be your computers, your TVs, things like that. E-waste is actually a huge resource because it contains valuable elements that can be reused, such as lead, copper, and gold. Okay, so now that we've looked at the process of life cycle analysis, let's go back to our original question of paper versus plastic. Nationwide, approximately 52% of our waste ends up in a landfill. Now, I'm interested to know, did you know that Wake County has both landfills and recycling? However, the city of Raleigh does not recycle plastic bags. If you put your plastic bag in your recycling bin, it's not going to get recycled. The only possibility of having your plastic bags recycled in the city of Raleigh is if you take them back to the store where you bought them. And you know, when you go into Harris Teeter, they have those bins at the front where you can put your plastic bags in there, under the assumption that Harris Teeter is taking them to a facility that will recycle them. That's the only way, if you're in the city of Raleigh, of getting your plastic bags recycled. We all have heard about the garbage patches in the Atlantic and Pacific. These garbage patches are made up of mostly plastic materials. Some of it's from litter, but plastic is a very lightweight product. Plastic bottles, plastic bags, things like that can get caught very easily in the wind or in ocean currents, things like that. Now, if paper ends up in one of these garbage patches, it's just going to disintegrate. Nothing's going to happen. It's just going to disintegrate. However, if plastic ends up in them, it can become toxic, or it can be eaten by wildlife. So now I'd like to go back to my original question. Who's going to choose paper next time they go to the grocery store? How many are still going to choose plastic? And I want to emphasize to you, my point today is not to tell you how you should answer that question. My point is not to tell you you should choose paper or you should choose plastic. My point here is for you to think about what happens to your waste after you dispose of it. Do you know what happens to it? Do you know where that plastic bag goes when you put it in your recycling bin? Do you know what happens to the paper bag when you put it in your recycling bin? I want you to really think about your actions, and are they actually helping the environment? Are they having the effect you think they are? I work for an organization called the Environmental Research and Education Foundation. We fund research for the solid waste industry through scholarships and grants. A few years ago, we did a project with Eckerd College. The researchers on that project were concerned about the number of styrofoam to-go containers that were ending up in the landfill. So what they did was they created a reusable to-go container, and they developed a program to put that into place. It's very interesting to note that Meredith College actually uses these to-go containers. So those of you who are students here may be very familiar with these. The researchers looked at the life cycle analysis of these to-go containers, and the biggest environmental impact that they found with the eco-clamshell containers was dishwashing. Except for water, the styrofoam containers increased energy, greenhouse gases, and obviously contribute more to the waste stream. In November of 2009, the researchers noted that they had sold almost 200,000 eco-clamshells, and assuming that these eco-clamshells replaced 180 disposable units per year, using the eco-clamshells kept more than 32 million styrofoam units out of the landfills. It also reduced the extraction of raw materials, energy, and greenhouse gases. The Eco Clamshell program is now a national effort. You'll see in the upper left-hand corner was the original clamshell that they developed. They've now developed many different sizes and shapes of the containers, and there are more than 500 accounts throughout the United States and Canada using these Eco Clamshell containers. Most of them are colleges and universities like Meredith, but a lot of corporations use them as well as healthcare facilities. So it's become quite a national program. So I want to leave you with this point. Be smart and stay informed. I hope that I've shown you that life cycle analysis can be a really good tool in guiding your decision making, not just at a corporate level, but at an individual level. Do you know what happens to your waste when you dispose of it? And just think about what happens, educate yourself, and think about the decisions and the actions you take and whether they're having the effect that you think they are. Thank you very much for your time.